Hello and a huge welcome back to all those that are watching on the UK Festival Week platform, whether that be via webinar, Zoom service today, Facebook or LinkedIn. A huge welcome to today's sponsors, University for the Creative Arts. We have a representative at the university who is going to be talking about his experience at the uni, as well as all things postgraduate education within the market. So just before I go any further, just a reminder, it is a live session. So if you do have any questions, please on social media, put your questions in the Q&A boxes or put it in the chat facility and we'll endeavour to get round to you as quickly as possible. There have been some questions that have been asked before the session, so we will endeavour to get round to that as much as possible. What we'll today cover, we will go through the presentation with the University for the Creative Arts. We'll have a live Q&A, which will be streamed across our webinar platform and our podcast platform as well. Postgrad.com, bit of info about us, and a £500 bursary opportunity for you to win, and of course, what's coming up next. At this stage, I'd like to introduce you to Jamie Dobson, a representative at the University for the Creative Arts. Jamie will be taking you through for the next 20 to 25 minutes, and we'll be back at the end for a Q&A. Jamie, over to you.
Yeah, really nice to meet you. So I'm going to try and talk quite quickly, I think, because there's lots of things that I want to run you through, I suppose. Yeah, I'm from University for the Creative Arts, a university that currently has 4 campuses across the southeast of the UK. And I'm going to be talking, or this is loosely the topic that I'm talking about, getting ahead with a postgraduate degree in graphic design. But I thought what I would do is talk about this from a very kind of personal kind of point of view, my own experience. Yeah, this is me. My name's Jamie Dobson. I'm a professor of design education, and I'm a graphic design lecturer at the university. I think the thing that I want to impress to start with, though, is that I've done lots of things, and I'm sure you've done lots of things. And it's taken me years and years to kind of build towards this position. Previous to this, at the moment, I'm a designer as well as working for the university. And previous to this, I was one of the heads of school at the university. For quite a long time prior to that, I was I was responsible for postgraduate study at the university. But I've done lots of other things too. I was an architect, a lighting designer. Prior to that, I worked in a bicycle shop. I'm going to talk a bit about this experience through this presentation. So yeah, my origin story, that's what I'm going to talk about really. And then I'm going to, after my origin story, I'm going to talk, I think, quite loosely about the university, about some of the things that I think are important in terms of the postgraduate community. So I'm from a town called Great Yarmouth in the UK, and it's a faded town. It's one of those kind of towns where, you know, it's quite run down, and people around me, my kind of peers, you know, they didn't go to university. My parents didn't have any qualifications at all. It's one of those kinds of places. This is what it looks like. But I was really lucky, kind of unlucky and lucky, but I was really lucky because when I finished school, I didn't know what to do. I ended up working in a fish and chip shop. And when I was working there, I worked with a man who was from Pakistan. He was an illegal immigrant, actually, and he was a qualified doctor. And he told me that I was wasting my life. You know, I had all of these opportunities, and I needed to make more of them, really. And yeah, he was really influential. I didn't have, you know, parents and teachers telling me this. I had this guy that I met through work, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I didn't really know what I was good at, but I knew that I was interested in fashion and I was interested in music. And actually I was interested in design, but I didn't really know it was design at that point. But I ended up going to this place, which was an art school at the end of the road that I was working on. You know, this was a complete turning point in terms of my life. I was interested in publications like this one on the left, Ray Gun, which was a magazine about music and, well, music and fashion, I suppose, and design. And so this particular issue is about 1990. And then the piece of work on the right-hand side, you can see the image on the right, is by an Italian futurist poet called Marinetti. This is from 1910. So there's, you know, 80 years difference between these two images. And, you know, this kind of blew my mind. And it was my tutor that pointed out this. You know, he pointed out these kind of connections. yeah, the kind of context, I suppose, of the work that I was interested in, which completely fascinated me. I started making images. So I made these images when I was 18. I'm pretty much, well, I'm almost 50 now. So I made these images when I was 18. And these are images which illustrate a poem by a poet called Seamus Heaney. I'm interested in poetry. I'm interested in writing. You know, I guess we're all interested in lots of things. And I made them out of these kind of found materials and kind of acquired materials, partly because I wasn't confident with my drawing. I think that's kind of interesting. You know, we use the kind of tools, the kind of methods, the kind of approaches that are comfortable, I suppose, that we're kind of confident using. We don't always have to default back to kind of drawing. I'm going to pick up on this again a little bit later in the presentation, but you meet amazing people through your studies. And so 2 examples, Marcus, this guy here who's an illustrator, I met him on my first day at art school. Jason, he took this photograph, he's a photographer. Actually, he studied sculpture, but he's a photographer now. So I met these 2 guys on my first day at art school. You know, this is one of the great, amazing kind of reasons to go to art school, I think, that you meet like-minded people. And then over time, you know, you collaborate, you work with, you kind of influence each other, and you're in competition with each other. Okay, so I studied graphic design at art school in Great Yarmouth. But then I wanted to go on to do a degree, and my parents couldn't understand this, actually. They couldn't understand why I'd want to do a degree. And they didn't understand what graphic design was. Graphic design was my kind of first love. So, you know, I was quite young and impressionable at this point. So I said I was going to study architecture. So that's what I did. And it took me a long time to find a job in architecture after studying architecture. But I think that was because my kind of practice, my kind of approach is quite different, quite unconventional. And actually, it was really good that I held out, because I ended up getting a job for a lighting design company called Spears & Major. So I'm just going to flick through quite quickly some images of projects that I worked on for Spears & Major. So this is the Millennium Dome in London, Gateshead Millennium Bridge in Gateshead, between Gateshead and Newcastle. This is something called Magna, which is a kind of science adventure centre. Designed by Wilkinson Eyre, the same people that designed the bridge I just showed you, but this is in Rotherham. Golden Jubilee Bridges. So this is a bridge that spans the Thames in London, between Charing Cross Station and the Royal Festival Hall. Swiss Re, or 30 St Mary Axe, or the Gherkin, a building in the City of London. My favourite project, I think, this is called the Bridge of Aspiration, again working with Wilkinson Eyre. This is a bridge that connects the Royal Ballet School to the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden in London. So again, you know, I'm working on the lighting for all of these projects. I worked on lots of international projects. I think I've just got one example here. This is Burj Al Arab in Dubai. And lots of refurbishment work. So this particular project is the St Paul's Cathedral in London. Okay, so postgraduate education. I mentioned that my first love really was graphic design, and I was working as an architectural lighting designer, and I didn't find it, you know, I decided that it wasn't fulfilling, or maybe not fulfilling enough. And I really wanted to go back and study graphic design again, go back and do a postgraduate qualification in graphic design. So I found a course called Communication Design. And I was lucky because the architectural lighting design company, they wanted to keep me on for a while, kind of part-time or freelance. And while I was part-time or freelance, I designed a book for them. So this is my first kind of proper graphic design project. But this is while I was studying. The course that I studied was 18 months long. Okay, but the type of work that I became really interested in, and I think it's really important that we're kind of ourselves, I suppose, when it comes to postgraduate study. You know, there's something that we really want to do. There's something that kind of drives us, and And the thing that drives us is going to be different, or likely to be different, to the thing that drives other people. And it requires a kind of confidence, though, I think, to kind of allow this to happen. So I was studying communication design, graphic design. Of course, my experience really is around lighting, and I was kind of interested in control systems and electronics and these other things. I was also really interested in music, and music's always been part of my life. So I started making these devices, these crude electronic devices that can translate things. So this particular device can translate sound to light. And of course, this is maybe the 25th iteration of this particular device, because all of the early ones didn't work. It takes a huge amount of focus and a huge amount of effort and development. So this is a kind of approximation of how this device works, because what I actually do, or what I actually did, was photograph it. So this is a photograph of the machine in action. It's an analog photograph, so it's a film camera. And the length of time it takes to take the photograph is the length of time it takes to play the record. And so this is a photograph of a piece of music, or a track by a kind of roots reggae artist, dub artist actually, by Tapazuki. They're called Tapazuki. So this is about 3.5 minutes long, this track. So the exposure is 3.5 minutes. So these are all photographs of the machine in action. These photographs actually are of tracks by a band called White Stripes, the White Stripes, and they were performing in London, and I was asked to produce a series of kind of visuals for the performance. Right, I'm just going to flick through a few more examples of similar devices, because all of these I made on my my postgraduate course, my MA. So this particular device seems to have stopped. But yeah, this particular device, it writes type in the air. And, I felt this was important. I was studying graphic design. Typography is really important to graphic design, of course. And so I made this device that would write type for me. Another example, this is a robot, a line following robot. And what it does is if it can't find a continuous line, it goes around in circles until it finds the line again. And the circles become larger and larger as it kind of spins. And I stuck LEDs to the back of this device. Okay, so these are photographs of this machine in action. Again, long exposure photographs. Right, okay, I think the thing that makes me a graphic designer maybe, or a designer rather than an artist maybe with this kind of approach, is the fact that the work that I produce is then kind of applied in I guess a kind of conventional or more conventional kind of advertising or graphic design context. And so here I'm working with an advertising agency called Fallon, who are based in London, on an advertising campaign for Sony. Here I'm using the record trace machine again, but this time I'm using it to illustrate a book about experimental music. Here I'm using the type machine to create the cover image of a book called Reinvented. I just want to make just a brief point. I think as designers, it's important that we are or can be kind of entrepreneurial. And so this particular project, I was working with a studio, kind of mate, a studio friend, to scale up this kind of idea of persistence of vision to kind of building size. Here I'm using the robot again for the Sony project. Here I'm working with a company called Meta Design. They had two offices, one in Berlin and one in San Francisco. This is for the San Francisco office. And then I subsequently went to work for them for a while. So one of the projects I worked on was Adobe Acrobat 8. And you can see that this image, if you imagine it kind of inverted, became one of the reference images for the illustrations on this packaging. Okay, I'm getting to the end of this bit. I guess the point I want to make here is that a postgraduate qualification can enable you to kind of jump out of something that's quite familiar. So for me, architecture, lighting design, and jump to another kind of creative area. And so I ended up working in advertising quite a lot. And I guess this particular project was the pinnacle of that. I'm just going to play it to you. So you may have seen this this advert before. It's for Sony and it's called Bouncing Balls. And it is literally 250,000 balls bouncing down a street in San Francisco. And everything is caught in camera. It's real. So just like the images that I made of the kind of record trace, they're all caught in camera. It's the same principle here. It's not faked. So yeah, fascinating project. Again, working with Fallon advertising agency based in London. Okay, so and I guess this kind of odd and unusual set of skills I have now, I can apply in lots of different ways. And so I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, I work for the university, and I have done for a long time, 14 years now, and I've done lots of roles there. About 2.5 years ago, I reduced my role for the university to allow me to do other things. One of the other things is projects like this. And so working with Nest, which is a Google company, and coming up with ideas for them, suggestions of other ways they might use the embedded technology within their devices. I thought I'd show you a bit of student work just briefly, because yeah, this is really important in terms of my practice. This is first year undergraduate work, not postgraduate work. And so this is a project that my students have just handed in. So they've only been at the university now for, half an academic year. I'm showing it to you because I'm really proud of it, I think. But what we get to do is we get to play. We get to play. And I think my kind of playful practice is really kind of useful and helpful in terms of their development. Okay, I now want to talk quite briefly, I think, about some of my contemporaries, because these are people that I met through doing a postgraduate course, and I think their story is similar to mine. They started from one place, they produce a body of work through their postgraduate study, which enable them to kind of go on and do other things. And so Stephanie, for example, Stephanie, she did a project, her final major project, or her final project for her MA, was entitled Writing Without Words, and she was really interested in being able to kind of visually interpret text and then compare the visuals, so she could compare different texts through the visuals that she made. I'm going to go through this really quickly. I mean, she's an information designer, and her kind of information design practice developed through her MA. And so these are some of her kind of sketches, the way that she was kind of thinking, trying to kind of interpret and visualize data. She was really interested in Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And so one kind of thread of this project was about On the Road. And it's interesting, I think, to see her development of this project through these images. Here, what she's looking at is she's looking at the book, she's looking at chapters, she's looking at paragraphs, she's looking at sentence structure, she's looking at a whole kind of range of things and trying to kind of encode it visually. And these are some of her outcomes. So she produced posters, and through these kind of posters, she presented her findings visually, methodically. Here she's looking at sentences and sentence structure. Here she's looking at the kind of rhythm, which is really important, of course, through Jack Kerouac's work. And here she's looking at sentence length, and trying to kind of work out the kind of relevance, maybe the kind of impact of that when comparing it to other authors. So interesting. So she made books, and the books kind of represented her research, beautiful books. And then I think the important thing, though, in the context of this is what she did next. And so, I mean, she is a really incredibly successful information designer. And I would encourage you, if you haven't come across her work before, to have a look. And these are some of the people that she's worked with. So her postgraduate qualification enabled her to kind of jump into working with clients like this. So the Welcome Collection, for example, there's an exhibition at the moment, or as part of an exhibition, some of her work is featured in the Welcome Collection at the moment. She's worked with Facebook, she's worked with the band OK Go, she works a lot with the Data Society. She's done designed apps for Stephen Fry, and she's done some really interesting work. She's also designed a beautiful children's book, which just this week won an award. Okay, the next example I want to give is Evelyn Kasikov. So she's really interesting. She's another contemporary. She's from Estonia. She lives and works in London. She was really interested in colour. And her question to herself was, what if you could see inside the structure of colour? And her project was called Printed Matter. And really what she was doing there was bringing together kind of craft and her interest in craft and modern technology to try and explore colour in 3 dimensions. And so again, I'm just going to flick through quite quickly, but these are some of her kind of sketchbooks, her kind of bound books, her kind of thinking. Here what she's doing is she's using the idea of kind of offset colour, like the 4-colour printing process. But instead of printing, she's doing cross stitch. So a kind of odd and interesting idea, incredibly labour intensive, but really very beautiful. So this again is all of her kind of thinking. And then this is her outcome. So her outcome was presented through a series of books through which she presented her findings. Lovely books. Okay, so again though, so this is the kind of offset color kind of example, and here she's exploring scale. But yeah, again, what happened next? So this is really important. So again, her website is really interesting, actually. And her practice is kind of split into 2. And so half of what, or a part of what she does is these kind of stitched illustrations. And she's done work for the Financial Times, Wired, and The Guardian. But the other part of her practice is as a book designer. And so she has done quite a lot of work for the University of Cambridge, Lawrence King, and Bloomsbury, for example. So again, you know, her postgraduate course enabled her to kind of jump into this kind of level of the industry. Okay, so changing tack slightly, I just want to talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit about professors and readers and lecturers and technicians at the university, because they're really important. So Liz Wilson, for example, she's our printmaking technician. She's a specialist in screen, but her own practice is super interesting. So she works as an artist in residence for different kind of manufacturing companies. And then she makes these kind of quite abstract films that then not explain, but kind of express something about the process at these companies. So these are some of her installations. Professor Jean Wainwright, so she's one of our theory lecturers. These are some of the books that she's written. It's really interesting because Jean she was a friend of Andy Warhol's. So she has this, you know, there's this kind of direct link to this kind of icon in terms of contemporary art through Jean, which is fascinating. Keith, he's one of our lecturers in Canterbury. And yeah, I'll flick through this actually, because there's so many things I could tell you. But Keith and his partner produced an indent for ITV, which is a television channel in the UK. Bianca is another printmaking technician, actually. She's a fine artist. Her own practice is fine art. She's really interested in kind of materials and textures. And this is something that she's brought to her support of our students. And so our students have been doing some really interesting work, kind of inspired and influenced by her interests. Thomas Dowse, so he's an illustrator. He teaches on the illustration course in Farnham, but he's also in a band. So he's in a band called Dry Cleaning that you may or may not have heard of. There he is, bottom left, playing the guitar. Anyway, I'm going to flick through there. Vina Vega, so another lecturer, actually. So she teaches on the illustration and animation course in Canterbury. And her practice is quite interesting because it ranges from ranges from the in terms of the clients, you know, from the kind of everyday tissues to the kind of high end and very kind of aspirational. So this is a piece of work for Prada. Right, I'm aware of time, so I'm just going to carry on. Ori Gersh. So Ori is a photographer. He's based in Rochester. I think there's an awful lot of kind of crossover relevance in terms of his kind of photographic practice, his kind of approaches, and mine, and quite a lot of our kind of students' interest, and also some of our kind of graduate work is quite inspired by his by his practice. So a really interesting guy. So again, all of these people that I'm presenting are people that would be around you, you know, supporting you, hopefully inspiring you and pushing you. And then I think the last example here is Olivia Twist. So Olivia is a graphic design lecturer. Her practice is really illustration. She has done some really quite interesting work recently for Levi's, a kind of special collection of Levi's, where she's been kind of customizing garments and having some of her kind of designs, text kind of embroidered onto the back of jackets, for example. Okay, so courses, getting to the nitty gritty. At postgraduate level, within my school, there are 3 courses that I think you might be interested in. The first is in Canterbury. It's called MA Visual Communication. It's a very broad course. And so you know, this comprises everything from well, graphic design, illustration, animation, photography, those kinds of areas, I suppose. And then there are the 2 courses in Farnham. So these are courses that I'm involved with, the MA graphic design course and the MA illustration course. So they're the postgraduate communication design related courses that we have. Okay, finally, I think, and preempting a question that will come later, but I'll answer it again. You know, what makes us different? I think there are a number of things that make us different, but one of them is the resources that we have. So this is our area for bronze and aluminium casting. You know, this is unusual. So here, students who are studying graphic design or illustration can cast their kind of 3-dimensional creations out of bronze and aluminium. That doesn't really happen anywhere else. You know, this is a fantastic opportunity to experiment with different materials and different processes. Equally, we have an amazing glassblowing resource, and really this is just for glassblowing students. But I have had students who are graphic designers using this resource. And one particular student, she was really interested in designing, you know, very ornate, very kind of beautiful packaging for a kind of perfume brand. And she took it as far as blowing her own kind of vessel that the perfume would come in. Amazing. These are jewelry making workshops. So these again are, this is pottery, so the kind of throwing resource. More kind of jewelry and metal work, 3D printing. So we have a lot of 3D printing, and we have different types of 3D printing. So everything from kind of, you know, resin based, but through to printing in clay as well is something that we can do. And then we have CNC machining, laser cutting, just a kind of simple laser cutter. And then we have really amazing printing. So here we've got different kind of offset litho printing, but we also have screen printing and lots of other different kind of approaches. And then we have things like Rhizo printers. So Rhizo printers look like, you might be familiar with this, but they look like old-fashioned photocopiers. But they're a really good way of printing in different kind of pure color, so fluorescents or metallics, for example. And I'm not sure whether this is finally, maybe, we have really good kind of traditional making resources. So you can make things out of wood and metal and plastic. And that's something that our graphic design students do, I think led by me a lot. And more resources. So that's the end. Hopefully that was useful. And I'm just going to close my presentation, and I think there are some questions now.
Excellent. It's a great session so far. At this stage, it would be my pleasure to welcome all the guests and listeners on our Postgrad podcast channel. So if you're joining us today, this has been a live session from the University for the Creative Arts. We have Jamie Dobson with us today. Jamie, thank you for your input so far. We've got a few questions for you. And I think just touching upon what you mentioned earlier, how you took a backward step from the creative arts ever so slightly just to enhance your career opportunities. Can you talk to me about the opportunities, not just within art, but outside of the arts as well, for potential students to come into the university, graduate, go away, and have a successful career? But like I mentioned, not just in art, it could be in any form of life.
Well, you know, we have two groups of graduating students. And so, you know, the predominant group are those who go on to work in art and design. And, you know, some of them will go on to work for companies, I guess, fairly kind of predictably, they'll go on to work. So, for example, a graphic design graduate will go on to work in graphic design. And this may be freelance or this may be working for someone else. And they may specialize in, you know, advertising, identity, editorial, or, you know, branding, a whole kind of range of things. And sometimes these things, again, are related to what they've studied, and other times they'll develop over time. You know, they'll bring their own kind of interest and approach to something else. We have quite a lot of graduates who go on to work for tech companies from graphic design. So these are things like, well, we've got one particular graduate who now works for the Human Interface Guideline team for Apple. So we have people who might go into those kind of areas. We've got a number of students who go on to work in games. So companies like Us2, which is more kind of, you know, handheld gaming. And then we've got one of our graduates set up a company called Preloaded. And so Preloaded make games for education.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, and they do things like they do quite a lot of AR and VR work as well. So there was an exhibition that finished recently in the Victoria and Albert Museum called, well, it's about Alice in Wonderland, and there was a VR experience as part of that, and his company was responsible for that kind of installation. And then we have people, freelance. We have a lot of people working freelance, but I always think of them as, you know, kind of good freelance. So doing doing really kind of important work. So, you know, I'm thinking of graduates who do work for like New York Times and Vogue, Liberty, Selfridges, London Zoo, these kind of clients, rather than, you know, for your kind of local fish and chip shop.
Yeah.
So yeah, important things. And then we have other fields. So we have quite a lot of people or a number of people who go on to work in kind of TV, around TV production, these kind of areas, marketing. Some people going into those kind of areas. And then we have the complete wild card. So we have people who go on to do, like, I'm thinking one person, she now restores furniture, and she's particularly interested in kind of mid-century furniture. And I think maybe her design degree, you know, helps with this. And we've got another guy who's a drone pilot. He's got a really successful drone company, and his final major project was kind of about this. So yeah, lots of things.
So is it fair to say then that the course they choose at PG level is vital in terms of their career, or would you say, you know, it doesn't hold you? I think a lot of people will be worried and are anxious that they do their undergrad degree, they then go and do their masters, and it has to be very similar to what they've studied at undergrad level already. I mean, I know for a fact that I've seen a few examples of people go on to study business related courses, all related to art still, but it's within the business field as well. So is it safe to say that, you know, the PG course they choose is vital to what they want to do next? And is that something you'd recommend choosing carefully?
Yeah, I think kind of vital is difficult though, isn't it? I think it's really important that it's a decision that's made with your heart. You know, I think it's really difficult, isn't it, when things cost so much, because you know, it has to be a kind of sound decision financially as well. But I've seen, so for example, I've seen some people, one particular student, she came to us to do a master's in graphic design, and she had studied philosophy before. You know, she's not unusual. We had one guy, actually we had two students one year who were kind of fascinating. One guy had been a surgeon and he had retired early, and his interest was graphic design. And then his friend, he had been a quantity surveyor, also retired early. They're not typical at all. But what was really interesting about them is that they brought all of their kind of knowledge and experience about stuff, loads of stuff, and they kind of applied it in a very kind of particular way. And I think that's the thing about postgraduate study. You bring all of your kind of experience, your kind of interest and that real kind of passion that you have, and you direct it through, graphic design or illustration. And the result is that you're different, your portfolio is different. And that's what gets you kind of opportunities when you graduate.
And of course, the beauty of postgraduate as well, it can be done at a later stage in your life. You're more mature, more experienced, more life experience and whatnot. So you probably know the decision to make. So talk to me a little bit more about the university, about the class sizes over the last couple of years. Obviously with COVID hitting the whole globe, really, it's affected everyone. Have the class sizes been shrunk, and as a result, has that benefited certain students? And moving forward, what's the case with the classes?
Yeah, so postgraduate level, the class sizes have shrunk a bit, and it's because it's more difficult to travel from other places, of course. Pre-pandemic, our graphic design course might have 100 students. I think now we've got maybe 60 students. So quite a considerable reduction. I mean, what's happened, which has been interesting, is that we've got students coming from more different places with a wider kind of variety of kind of backgrounds. And that was always our aspiration anyway. We want lots of people coming together into this kind of melting pot. That was my experience of being a student. I think my cohort represented something like 60 different countries. It was amazing. So now I think our class sizes range, across graphic design, visual communication and illustration from, I think in September, we'll have maybe from 70 or 80 down to about 30, depending on the course.
In terms of the modes of learning as well, I know you touched upon it in your presentation during the webinar earlier. Online learning, is that an opportunity for a student? I know art is very much a hands-on thing, and you need to be there and you need to be able to do it yourself. And obviously for international students, the opportunity not just to come to the UK, but to fantastic places in where your campuses are in Farnham and in Kent, I believe, are great. Talk to me about what an international student can do if they can't make it to the UK. Can they go online?
Well, the short answer is no. Our courses are in person, and we were desperate to get back to in person. So I think we must have been the first university completely teaching in person again. And of course, we had to make exceptions during the tail end of the pandemic's ongoing. But when we were allowed back again, we had to make some exceptions, and so we were doing some teaching online. But no, that's absolutely the kind of exception. And the reason is, what we do is so hands-on. And so it's not, it's partly bouncing ideas off each other. It's partly being in a studio together. But a lot of it is about using kind of materials you wouldn't normally get your hands on. There is one other, there is an alternative though, because the university also has an organization called Open College of the Arts, OCA, which is a online only university. So it's a bit like the OU.
Like the Open University, let's say.
That's right. So that is an opportunity for people, and all of the information is on our website. And so if you go to any of the course pages, you can find information about that too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also from an international student perspective then, because like you mentioned earlier, from what you remember of your student days, you had 60 different nationalities there. What's the nationalities like in the university? Is the accommodation on site? Is it on campus? Talk to me about the two campuses mainly that you guys have got in. Am I right in saying one's in Farnham and the other in Rochester? Is that right?
Well, no, for the courses that we're talking about, graphic design and illustration are in Farnham. And visual communication is in Canterbury.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I'll start off with Canterbury and visual communication. Canterbury is a small campus, quite a small campus, but Canterbury is a city, and so there are other universities, in the city. And so in terms of the student experience, I think it could be really quite vibrant. There's lots of things to do. Accommodation for students in Canterbury, we've got one accommodation block on campus, actually right next to the studios. And then we've got some other kind of private accommodation around the city. But again, because it is it's a university city, there's quite a lot of student accommodation. So if you wanted to do that independently, you can. Farnham is quite different. So Farnham is the biggest campus, and we've got 1,700, maybe 2,000 students. That's not a huge amount in kind of other university terms, but for us, that's pretty big. And Farnham is a small town. It's a really beautiful small town, a Georgian
It's a
town.
festival town. Am I right in thinking that? I think I visited it once before. Beautiful little place.
Yes, well, it's a lovely place. We have a kind of an arts centre. There's a castle on a hill. There's quite a lot of kind of cultural stuff. But it is small. But we have a lot of accommodation for our students, and so we've just built another, I think, 4 blocks on our campus, and so these are new accommodation blocks, and so you have your own bathroom, and they're all very modern. So yeah, it's a really nice place to live and work. I mean, I would say that Farnham there's the kind of I guess the kind of culture revolves around the campus rather than revolving around the town.
Yeah.
And so I think being a student and being kind of alongside so many other students who are all kind of interested in similar things must be thrilling.
Yeah, I must add as well, Jamie, that both Canterbury and Farnham, they're not a million miles away from major cities. London's not a million miles away from either of them. Very accessible to other major cities and large towns as well on the outskirts of London. So, you're never too far away from, if you did want that vibrant nightlife, but you wanted the nice knowledge of knowing that you're actually in a quiet area of the world in Farnham, if you like. But with so many other students, I think that's important, isn't it?
I think you're absolutely right. From Farnham, we're 50 minutes to London. I take the students to London a lot to start with. Partly because, there's so much for us to kind of access, and it's a great resource, but also just to demonstrate how easy it is. And then we've got Guildford. So Guildford actually is a town, but it's a really big town, quite a big university town. And that's only about 8 miles from here, so really close.
Excellent. And one final question, really, which we haven't touched upon, you briefly mentioned it, but scholarships. We've mentioned these international students that will look to come over to the UK inevitably. What support and what funding opportunities do the UCA offer to these students?
Yeah, well, we have we have a number of scholarships available, and it depends on a number of things. So it depends on where you're from, it depends on the course that you want to study, and it depends on your portfolio. And I interview an awful lot of international students. I review an awful lot of international student portfolios, and it's my job and people like me to recommend applicants for scholarships. So it's always based on portfolio. It's not based on qualifications, actually.
Brilliant. Okay.
So we're looking for people who are interesting, driven, who we can really see will make a difference in terms of our kind of community. I would suggest that you look online, look at our website to check the most up-to-date details, because it can change. And I also would suggest that if you're interested in a scholarship, I mean, everyone's interested in a scholarship, but I would suggest that you tell us when you apply, because then that prompts the person that's looking at your portfolio to think about your work in relation to ticking that box. I think that's a really important thing to do.
I also think what's really important, earlier, you mentioned it earlier, Jamie, about you've got to go for a course with your heart rather than your head, which is really difficult because your head said this is going to cost so much and your heart tells you that's what you want to do. And I think that's so important. I think the feedback I've heard of other providers and other universities when they're looking to hand out scholarships is, are you driven? What are you going to contribute to the university and to yourself in your own career with this scholarship. And then they can honestly make an honest assessment as to whether or not that's right for you, rather than going, you desperately need the money, you just want to come to the UK, you need a scholarship, here's a course. Give it to somebody that really requires it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's maybe it's telling us why you deserve the scholarship. You know, that's a good angle. Because I think someone just saying, you know, I want a scholarship, if everyone's saying I want a scholarship, it's quite difficult to kind of differentiate. So why is it? What is it that you're going to bring? And actually, sometimes this might be things that you might overlook. So this might be your, you know, interest in other stuff, you know, kind of clubs or societies and things that you might bring to us. You know, the community, you know, our communities are kind of multi-layered. It's not just about discipline. You know, we're interested in people who are also interested in, you know, film or cycling or whatever it might be. So yeah, maybe these are the kind of other layers that add credibility to your request for a scholarship.
That makes sense. Jamie, thanks for your time. Very much appreciated. At this point, I'm going to have to say thank you. We are up against it a little bit with time. For those of you that are watching and listening now as well, a little bit about Postgrad and what we've got to offer moving forward. Our sessions will focus around postgraduate learning and fresh accommodation for the rest of the week. In terms of those live sessions, we got one at 11 and one at 12. But for now, a huge thank you to the University for the Creative Arts. Jamie, thanks for coming on today and making this happen. And hopefully we'll see you in the not too soon future.